What a great thrill it is for me to be able to make your acquaintance and be here with you today. And anybody recognize this melody? Why don't you join me in singing this, will you? Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Oh, imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Ooh, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Yeah, good for you. Good singing. There's that in my mind that that song of John Lennon's will go down as one of the favorites from this past millennium. And what is it, do you think, that makes that song so popular? So popular that most of us know the words. Probably if they weren't up here, with just a little bit of prompting, you could have sung the whole thing, don't you think? It's a very singable tune, which is important. But the reason we love it so much is the way the words and the tune merge together and allows us to feel that condition which Lennon imagines and hopes for is possible. Isn't that what we hope for? A world without war, without hunger, without poverty, without racism, homophobia, classism, greed, or dishonesty. Isn't that the world that we all want? Isn't that what we sing about at the end of every service? Let there be peace on earth and let it be peace in me. Let it begin in me. Yeah? Yeah. So, has anybody read Isaiah chapter 43 lately? No. Drats. Well, I won't have to read it all to you, I promise. Isaiah wrote that chapter primarily because the people of Israel were longing, you see, for exactly the same thing. They'd just suffered a huge military defeat. They'd been evicted from their country and taken, exiled to Babylon, their ruler, to their land, the land of the people that had conquered them. The Israelites' God, their concept in which they had always placed their trust to care for them, their faith in their destiny, God seemed to be powerless to help them, or perhaps just wasn't picking up the phone anymore. And they were asking, is there any hope for us? Has God rejected us completely? The second part of Isaiah, from chapter 40 on, is answering this question. Is there any hope? Can there be hope? Now, I want to explain a little bit about how I see the Bible. Now, all of us, of course, know in Unity we interpret the Bible metaphysically rather than literally. But I see it is very important for two reasons. It's one of the world's most important long chronologies of the evolving consciousness of humankind. And it contains many of the timeless ideas and concepts that I consider to be high consciousness, right thinking, the right way to live at whatever level that might apply to you. And many of these ideas are also contained in the scriptures and the writings of other world religions, which gives credence to their timeless wisdom. It also contains many archetypal stories about human nature and the human condition of failing and overcoming, as well as moving poetry and other things that move us. But the prophet Isaiah wrote in these last several chapters to comfort and inspire a discouraged and very depressed people. Now, he tells the Israelites that their God will restore them to their homeland. And as evidence, he reminds them of their history. He tells the story of the Exodus once again, reminds them how they were rescued from slavery in Egypt hundreds of years earlier. And this is the big event, the birth of their nation. It was the thing that they always looked back to. But listen to what he says in verse 19 through 20. The prophet says, the Israelite God says, forget all that old stuff. Compared to what I'm going to do now, it's nothing, for I am about to do a new thing. See, I've already begun. Don't you see it? I'll make a pathway through the wilderness. Yes, I'll make rivers in dry wastelands, so my chosen people will be refreshed. I will pour out water to quench your thirst and irrigate your parched fields. I will pour out my spirit on your descendants and blessing on your children, and they will thrive like willows on a riverbank. Wow. Why does Isaiah invoke streams and water so much? Because water makes all the difference between death and life, between destruction and hope. I'm not sure we appreciate it so much here in the Great Lakes region because we have plenty of water here, and sometimes I think we may take it for granted. But if you live in Oklahoma, where I was born and reared, and where my brother still has 100 acres, you know that water is essential for life, for livelihood, for prosperity, for peace. It is the stuff of life and of hope. So Isaiah tells the Israelites that God is telling them, I haven't forgotten you. I'm going to bring you back home. He gave them hope. What about us today? Is there hope for us today? What about the world we live in? According to the UN, there are 10 major wars going on right now. And a war is defined as having 1,000 battlefield deaths a year. There are also 32 current civil or intrastate wars with mostly uncountable civilian casualties. The world's nuclear threat is expanding to other countries. How many of the displaced Syrians will ever see their homeland again, assuming that they survive this terrible war? How many will have their property or their possessions restored? How many have lost spouses and children in the wars that we've been engaged in for the last 10 years? How many North Koreans separated these 60 years now from family? South Koreans, how many North Koreans separated from their family for 60 years, North and South? How many of them will see one another again? So citing all of this despair, I want you to notice a difference between Lennon's vision and what the Israelite prophet wrote. Isaiah interpreted that God doing a new thing would mean restoration to the way things were when the Israelites were conquerors in their part of the world. But what we know in hindsight is that it was 800 years before they got back to their homeland again. That's almost 4 times as long as the United States has been in existence. And so what happens when people inhabit a land for that long? Well, human nature is to mix, and both cultures influence and absorb one another so that the country becomes a whole different expression of culture. The Israelites were mostly absorbed into the Babylonian culture, blended and diffused. It has happened every time any group has enslaved or conquered or invaded any other group of people. You see, the new thing that was being created was a new way of life, a blended culture, and as time passed, a reinterpretation of both cultures. That better be Jesus. A new thing, the new thing when they first got there, they could not possibly see. Hello. I wonder what would have happened if the prophet had been able to say to them, hey, look, you're here now. There isn't much you can do about it except make a choice about how you're going to experience it. You can choose to do your best and work with folks and do the best you can and choose happiness, or you can choose to pine for a land that you probably will never see again. And remember, even if you do get back there, will be completely different than it was when you last saw it. So why not be open and receptive to this new thing that is being created? When Jesus' consciousness and teachings began to spread through Jewish society, that's what he said. Hey, it's not houses or land or money or possessions that matters. It's how you choose to experience your life, the circumstances that you're in. It isn't being poor that impoverishes one. It's being impoverished in mind and heart that makes one insatiable, regardless of the level of prosperity attained. Lennon's song demonstrates how the consciousness of the human race has changed. From Isaiah to Buddha to Jesus to Gandhi to Martin Luther King to Lennon to Dalai Lama to the world movement of spiritual awakening that we're experiencing now. Now, Isaiah reports to the Israelites that God is telling them, remember not the former things, nor consider the things of old. Behold, I'm doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? And this is interesting to me because this is the part of the evolution of human consciousness that I'm talking about. Because while the prophet Isaiah could write this very inspiring and hopeful message, he still could only see it in terms of the way things were. To him, making it right was restoration to the way things were. His spiritual understanding was the old ways would be restored to the people. That was all that he could imagine. Lennon, however, sees it very differently. He sees things in a way that the human race has virtually never realized before. No heaven, no hell, no living in the past or the future, only the present moment. No countries. Why pine for your former land? Figure out what's good about this one now. No religion, no possessions to kill or die for. Absolutely no reason or need to stand your ground. No greed or hunger. All the people living a life in peace. Peace that is so much more than just the lack of warring. Whether it's John Lennon's song or these words from the ancient Hebrew scriptures written nearly 3,000 years ago, it's the world that we all want. Peace, freedom, prosperity. Now, in the consciousness of the Hebrew Bible, we have to understand that God is responsible for everything. They blamed God when anything went wrong, and they praised God when it went right. So here's the thing about that. If we're going to make anything or anyone outside of ourselves responsible for the circumstances that we are in, we will continually allow others to place us in circumstances which we may or may not choose. So the way unity embraces this ancient truth is that this God who is responsible for everything indeed resides within us. We are indeed each one an individualized expression of the energy, the power to create a life, a community, a world that works for all. It's a serious departure from Hebrew Scripture. No more room for victim consciousness. This divine universal energy that is called God is very differently defined, and it is not outside of us or separate from us. We are that great universal we are one. I know most of us have probably made that shift, at least in our thinking, but I sometimes had a harder time, particularly in the early days, practicing it. And maybe it's time for a new thing, a new concept. How many times do you suppose you have said something on the order of think outside the box? Yeah, who could count that, right? So it's usually like this. I know I skipped it the last time, but yeah. She says, we need new cliches. Really, why do you say that? Well, the old ones are so overused. It's usually like that. But I recently came across this quote, and while it is not new, it struck me in a new way. Instead of thinking outside of the box, get rid of the box. Thinking outside of the box gives you an expanded box, and that's not a bad thing. But what is needed for this century to move forward is to throw the box away. Stop using the old box as a reference point at all. Now, I have to tell you, I really struggled with letting go of my visualizations and my languages of God and how that could be. I was reared a fundamentalist Nazarene minister's daughter. And boy, I can preach it like I'll get out. So I really struggled with it. And I felt like I was really, really taking a big leap. Sailing off into the wild blue yonder, into the unknown. But really, it was just like this. Now, Judaism identified one God and dismissed the graven images because people tended to pray to those instead of the one true God. The progress that early Christians made was that Christ could come into your heart and you could never always be with him or never be separate. But they couldn't quite get that wholeness concept. They weren't quite there yet. And they certainly would never claim to be an expression of the divine. But while I truly in my heart of hearts believe in oneness, and I have had amazing experiences and transformative experiences in meditation where I've experienced that boundlessness, that limitlessness, and I'm just part of the soup, part of the milieu. I've had that. The truth is, a lot of the times it's a hard one to visualize that sense of oneness. I see the boundaries of our skin around each one of us, and I celebrate that. I love our diversity and our differences. I rejoice in that. But I've struggled with forging a new vision that represented what for me is that oneness. Something that doesn't show God as a localized entity like all of the pictures and concepts that I grew up with. And so I have adopted Einstein's theory of energy, that we are energy powered by spirit. The energy that is in us comes into us with our first breath and empowers spirit in us into expression. It is that humming energy that never stops, never absent, only changing in form and expression. It's just all energy ever does. And this is how I think of it now. God, to me, stands for animated energy. That is life, intelligence, substance, abundance, wholeness, peace, joy, creativity, that empowered this flesh at birth and will disempower this flesh at death. And I found this picture which comes closest to how I experience unity teachings and truth as much as anything I know. This is just a picture of the World Wide Web. And I see this energy that everything that has form comes from this energy. And I see all those little dots around there as the individualized manifestation of energy that spirit has breathed into animation. Maybe one of those dots stands for the human race, and maybe one stands for fish, and one for animals, and one for plants, and one's for other cosmoses. I'm making it up, so I don't know. And then inside of each dot, just like you see here, there's a whole other web, just like the one that it came from. And maybe that human dot, inside of that dot, represents all of those individualized expressions of energy that we are. And everything that is relevant vibrates in and through this web. We can never be separate from that energy. We are on it and in it. If we are willing to be open and receptive to that energy, we will know what we need to know, how to do it, and when to do it, calmly, pleasantly, with wisdom, with compassion, with clarity. Now, that doesn't mean that everything that is known comes to us. That would be overwhelming and not very useful. But the things we need to know in order to make the best decision for ourselves and others will come to us. I must tell you, this image engages my brain and my mind and my heart. It feels congruent with my beliefs. But the language of energy is a little tough. It explains, but it isn't very personal. It is impersonal, which is the very thing which makes it so powerful and profound. It doesn't depend on me. I depend on it. But something still in my human nature, maybe from my upbringing even, still wants to personalize this energy so that it's more relatable in a form that I can describe in very human terms. Maybe the most common experience I have is usually in interactions with other people, another person or with a group of people. I firmly believe that we usually experience God in our interactions with one another. So that's what the language of worship, of prayer, of conversation is all about. Spiritual conversation is about. It's about that personal, how we deal with it personally. And so I don't worry so much. I used to worry about it a lot, but I don't worry so much anymore about the words from traditional Christian songs. I didn't want to use the name Jesus for a long time, and then I drove my music team nuts, bless their hearts. But I must confess, I prefer less specific metaphors for God, and spirit is my favorite term. Words, concepts that help us connect in personal ways with this energy that life, health, peace, and joy are perfectly fine. Use what works for you. I need those words and those concepts in order to communicate with myself. That is the energy that I am in and through me. So the prophet Isaiah spoke to the Israelites in a way that they could personally connect to in their hearts and their emotions and in their minds. Our language is not so different. I still struggle with how to name the concepts I believe in so that my language connotes that oneness all the time. But sometimes when I feel a little desperate or overwhelmed, I find myself praying in that same old language I grew up with, oh dear Jesus, until I can get clear about the truth that I know and truly claim in words that are congruent with my beliefs now, what I know is true. No lack of separation from divine universal energy and source that I know without a shadow of a doubt is the truth of our being. Now, our teachings about this are often misinterpreted. Sometimes we begin to believe we can or should control what happens and how it happens. We confuse the way we want things to be with Spirit's guidance. But this is what I have learned. I can't control much of anything. I can, however, control how I choose to experience it. The Spirit within us is peace, joy, comfort, if we choose to experience life that way. Doesn't mean that I'll always be free of hardship. Doesn't mean that I will always be free of pain. Food may be scarce, safety may be threatened, but we can each one make a choice about the mental state and actions to take in our own best interest and everyone else's with whom we are concerned. In almost every tragedy, there are many people who come through it and thrive in the midst of it and are able to be successful and happy and live good lives after that event based on decisions that they made in the midst of that really awful tragedy. And once they overcame that immediate threat, they began to thrive once again and did so by reaching out in order to help others by telling their stories of overcoming. They became involved in movements to make life better for others. What lies behind wars and terrorism and crime and corporate greed and rape of the environment is the ego's fear that it will not survive. And the ego will begin to construct whatever scenario it needs to so that it thinks that it will get what it thinks it needs. It's ego that puts me at the center of the world and says, I don't care how this affects anybody else. I'm going to do it my way. Or how could that bother you? That's the way I want to do it. Think of all of the grief caused by injustice and inequality, by starvation, by globalization, by global warming. And when you ask, how did we get here? Why are we in this mess? The ancient and current answer still is because of our unwillingness to recognize that while developing ego as a young person is very important, surrendering ego to selflessness, to our original oneness in spirit, is essential. That is the new thing that Spirit creates within us so that we become new, our life becomes new. If we stay connected, if we're willing to take time to know our oneness, to be connected with the web, then we can take for granted that this divine universal energy will pour out water to quench your thirst and irrigate your parched fields. Bless your children and your descendants. We were not created to be miserable and uptight and suffer. So if we are willing to relax, stay in the energy of oneness and guidance and wisdom, one step at a time, our path is revealed. So this is what I want you to take with you into this new year. Stop efforting. Stop trying to make things happen. Do more of what you enjoy. And make a choice to enjoy the things you have to do in order to thrive in our work and in our families. It's the difference between applying self-discipline to do what we should do, changing our attitude, and the energy of efforting to try to make things go exactly the way we want them to. So the best advice I was ever given is this, and I take it very seriously. The minute I feel like I have to do anything, lie down and stay there until the feeling passes. Whatever's messed up in your life today, and we all have messes in life, they come along, it just happens that way. You know, we are what we are. It can be put to right if we will stay connected and listen to the wisdom within us. That's a promise. There's a future to hope for beyond the current mess. Pay attention. Let your ego be your servant instead of the other way around. In Reinventing the Body and Resurrecting the Soul, Deepak Chopra writes, your body is boundless. It is channeling the energy, the creativity, the intelligence of the entire universe. Are you ready for a radical change in the way you manage your affairs? Are you ready for a radical change in the way you manage your relationships? Are you ready for a radical change in the way you see your body? See, Spirit is doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will live as